Welcome to Conversations the World Over. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Tonight we bring you the beloved columnist and contributing editor at the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan. Peggy is the New York Times best-selling author of When Character Was King and What I Saw at the Revolution, among others. But I spoke with her on this occasion about one of her most moving works, John Paul the Great, Remembering a Spiritual Father. In it, she lovingly explores the life and legacy of the former Pope, now Saint John Paul II. I sat down with her in Washington, D.C. to talk about the book and her journey to it. And as we celebrate Pope St. John Paul's feast day, it seems an appropriate time to revisit this conversation with Peggy Noonan. Now, I believe, after reading this book, that this is sort of the fruit of the 9/11 experience in your life, a continuation, if you will, of the last book.
Oh, isn't that interesting? You want to know something? That is probably true. I'll tell you, after 9/11, which was an intensely spiritual event for all of us, but maybe especially for those of us in New York City, I found myself turning more and more to the leadership of and the example of our old Pope, John Paul, who I felt when he was Pope was probably a saint. And of all those who sort of become spiritual symbols for you by which you can in part navigate through life by keeping your eye on the star that is them. For me, he was one of the central stars that was in my time.
Why do you think, tell me about the first time you saw him. You talk about it in the book.
Oh gosh, the first time I saw him in the flesh was in the 1970s in New York at St. Patrick's Cathedral. When I was a young producer at CBS News and was just a fabulously young idiot, was lucky enough to be in St. Patrick's when this great man walked in. I don't think I fully knew how lucky I was, but I was a young producer working on radio side. And it was my job to make sure that we talked him in, as it were, you know, and so then now the Pope is entering the cathedral. Now the Pope is saying Mass in his white vestments. But when I saw him in those days, I was a young lady, I did not fully appreciate it. It's a funny thing, I could look at him and see and feel his power, but I didn't understand the importance he would have in my life. I didn't understand his importance as a human being in the world.
And I think it's that story. Weren't you about to go into the cathedral, but you decided to come out and then they wouldn't let you back in?
Yeah, I was all dressed up. I mean, I'm pretty frank in the book.
I was
all dressed up. I considered... Sorry, I considered the Pope is coming to America. He's a great man, he's a saint. And I'm thinking, what will I wear? And I'm also thinking, there'll be a lot of cute people there. So I'm all dressed up and I'm wearing all my CBS credentials and I'm feeling very good about myself. I walked out, you know, I had to be very carefully cleared in by security to get there, even in the 70s. I decided that I looked so wonderful, everybody should more or less see me a little more than they had been. So I walked outside again just to look at the crowd in a thoughtful manner. And they closed the doors behind me and a cop walked up to me and said, "You can't get back in, lady." I said, no, I'm a producer at CBS News. He said, "I don't care who you are." That way. I had to go around and talk my way in again. The thing was, that was the first time I saw the Pope. The next time I saw the Pope, it was at St. Patrick's Cathedral again. I was with a friend. This time I knew who he was. I knew he was important. I had become a Catholic and I had become someone led by his example and someone really captivated by what he represented. This time I was not in effect thrown out of the cathedral. This time my friend who was coming with me was late. She couldn't get into New York. We ran to the cathedral. They closed the doors. Everything's shut down. We're waiting at a barricade, just watching as the Pope mobile comes by, figuring we'll never get in, it's over. This time a cop, this time a detective in a suit, crosses from St. Patrick's, looks at me, says, "Peggy Noonan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, okay, come on in." I said, "You're kidding." I said, well, at this point I'd made friends with people at the barricades, these poor people who couldn't get in, who were locked out by security. I put my arms around them and I said, "We're all together, can we go?" He said, "Come on in." He opened the thing and we all ran in together. It was really very beautiful. A bunch of people who came to New York from Chile, you know, and who were sobbing because they couldn't get in. A New York socialite who's so generous to the church and so kind to it, but she'd been locked out too. Anyway, at that point, it was almost as if God was saying, now you know who he is. Now you know what your faith is. Now you know what the Catholic Church is. It's come on in. You know, it's the exact opposite of the first circumstance.
Tell me your thoughts of, I mean, I was dazzled by this Pope. He's the only Pope I really remember, I mean, from the time I was a kid on. The last movement of this life, the suffering Pope.
Yeah.
What did that mean to you?
Oh, John Paul as a suffering soul, as a man who came forward every day and suffered in front of us. It's hard to remember. I tell my son this, he's 18 years old. It's hard to remember, but when we met this Pope, when he came out on the balcony in 1978, this impossible man, this blonde-haired Pole, you know what I mean? After all these Italians, this young Polish guy who looks like a skier. He looks like he's a swimmer or a kayaker or something, which of course is what he turns out to be. You know, he's a big guy. He was young and he was healthy and he loved, you could tell, his physicality. You know, he loved hiking. What happens to him? He gets older, as everyone does, if they're lucky, and he gets ill. And he can't be the physical self he was anymore. And it was almost as if I thought at the end he was bringing himself into the world to say, I am human life. And human life in no matter what its form, beat up, sick, unwell, unwhole, incompetent, no matter what its form, it is still human life, and it has value and dignity and beauty of its own. I thought every day in the last 5 years of his papacy, he was telling us that. He also, in the last few years of his papacy, became more forthcoming about it, more eager to share stories of his youth, how hard it was for him to become a priest. You know, in a Poland run by Germany and then by the Soviet Union. It was hard. He suffered to be what he was.
Why did you decide to write this book, Peggy? I mean, I've been hearing about this book for years and waiting for it for years. Why did you decide to do this, and why now?
Oh, you know what? I loved when I would write about the Pope for the Wall Street Journal sometimes. It was a little unusual. I wrote about the Pope a little more than a political columnist would tend to do.
I noticed.
But you know what? The reaction I would get from people, the best letters I ever got were after a piece on the Pope. And it's not just from Catholics. When you write about something that is spiritual, or that touches upon the spiritual, that touches upon your deepest belief, and that touches upon your honest belief that you hold happily enough so that you can share it and not be afraid people will do various things with that information. When you come forward and speak that way, it's as if people let that same thing within them come out and jump towards you, you know, and they would write wonderful letters. I just loved writing about this man. I loved thinking about him. I loved witnessing him. And I wanted to share my excitement about him, and I wanted to give him, in a way, it was obvious to me in the last few years, this was a parting kiss, you know, a parting gesture. I wanted to kiss his hand.
I was stunned that you didn't spend a lot of time here talking about John Paul, the geopolitician. I mean, you talk about Lech Walesa and what he said. What did he tell you? You interviewed what? Lech Walesa?
Lech Walesa was marvelous. I interviewed him about John Paul, and I asked him just plainly, look, was John Paul responsible for what happened with the Soviet Union, with the whole change of East and West and the fall of the wall and all this stuff, and what happened in Poland? And Lech Walesa was very honest. He said, you know, the great credit goes to God, of course, and some of the credit goes to me, but all the rest goes to John Paul. You know? Because he came forward. John Paul refused to acknowledge publicly the fact that Europe was split between communism and the non-communist countries. He sort of looked almost down at Europe from a godly height and said, you know, God doesn't see divisions. God doesn't see a wall. God sees all of his people, and he sees his beloved Polish people who are free in spirit and will never not be free. So he was his vantage point was different, and he sped along the process by which I think people could imagine throwing off the awful political yoke of communism and being free. And you know, once people can imagine that, once they can imagine something, big things happen.
You spend a great deal of time in the book on the assassination attempt and the aftermath of that and what it revealed about the man himself. You reflect on that a little bit for us, particularly his notions of forgiveness and what he was teaching the world in that moment.
Oh my gosh. I think one of the great transcendent and redemptive moments of the entire 20th century is Pope John Paul II meeting with a Mehmet Ali Agha, the man who shot him, who went there to St. Peter's Square as an assassin, meaning to kill him, to stop his life. And you know, when Agha shot the Pope, he hit the Pope. The Pope was convinced. It was the anniversary of the first visitation at Fatima. The Pope was deeply in love with the Blessed Mother, felt watched over by her, loved her very much with a great Polish fidelity. He felt that she had saved his life. She felt that she, with her hand, redirected the bullet away from the nerve areas and spinal areas, which, if it had hit her, it would have killed him.
Instant death. Yeah.
All right, he felt he owed his entire life to her. She had saved his life. He got well. It was a rocky and difficult recovery that he had in the hospital. And what does he want to do after? He was never mad at Mehmet Ali Agha. He was never angry with him. He was not even interested in who sent Mehmet Ali Agha to shoot him. Was it the Bulgarians? Was it the Russians? Who was it Islam? Who was it? He said, I know very well who it was, meaning it was the evil one. And whoever he used in his wicked ways, it doesn't really matter that much. Anyway, the great transcendent moment and redemptive moment of the 20th century, I think, is when John Paul II met with Agha in his prison cell and forgave him and chatted with him. And poor Agha, this poor man, he had heard part of what the Pope thought about the Blessed Mother saving his life. And Mehmet Ali Agha got it in his head that the Blessed Mother might be mad at him and put curses upon him. And he asked the Pope about it. The Pope said, oh no, she loves you. She would never do that. And he explained to his would-be assassin who the Mother of God was, with love and charity and tenderness.
How important was that moment to you? Because woven into this story of John Paul, woven into the great moments of particularly the latter part of this pontificate, is also, I would argue, the spiritual journey of Peggy Noonan.
Yeah.
How instrumental was he in your rediscovery of your faith, and why do you call him remembering a spiritual father? In what way is he a spiritual father to you, Peggy?
I'm going to try not to do out of respect for TV and for you, to not do a long and rambling answer.
Darling, you can ramble and long along all you want on these airways. We have time.
I think we all need a spiritual father or spiritual fathers. Sometimes the father we are born to in life is the person who raises us up in our faith and brings us to it and explains it to us. Sometimes our fathers are not able to do that, or not inclined to do that. If you're lucky, and I would say if you're smart, you'll keep looking around and you'll find a spiritual father and or spiritual mother who can help you on the way. John Paul, I feel I was so lucky that when I was a young woman, he came into the papacy. He became the leader of the Catholic Church. He became what he became. It could have been an old dullard, and instead I got John Paul. I was lucky.
This is true.
One of the ways I can explain to you what he meant to me is some of it is just so bottom line essential, as in this. One day John Paul was walking by the press. Somebody yelled a question to him, and I don't know what the question was, but John Paul gestured with his hand with his rosary beads, and he said, this is the answer. Just holding up his rosary beads in answer to a question. And I thought, oh, that's the answer? Well, then I must look into that. You know? So I bought rosary beads. I didn't say them, but I bought them.
You had a nice collection.
They were so pretty, and I kept them in a little drawer by my bed. But in time, you know, I tell a story in the book.
Yeah, please tell that story. I love this story.
Well, there was a time in my life, I was going through a difficult time in a very personal way. And as happens in life, all of a sudden, it's funny, but people start doing funny little rosary bead things around me. I got a friend who starts wearing rosary beads, and he's praying the rosary all the time. I got another friend who sends me a book about the history of the rosary. Then I got another friend who sends me a video with these beautiful little pebbles on the front, and it's a history of the rosary. Well, I'm thinking about all that. I'm constantly thinking, gee, I probably should say a rosary. You know, I should probably learn how to do it, get myself a little booklet. One day, during this time, going through a hard time, all these little things happening, I got up one morning, I poured myself, as I always do, from a little Krupp coffee maker, a glass of coffee. I don't have a cup, I have a glass of coffee in one of those big thick tumblers that are unbreakable. I pour the coffee, I'm holding it in my hand, suddenly it bursts apart in a million pieces, the glass that I'm holding in my hands. This was so amazing to me that I just looked at it like this, like, what the heck? My son was in the next room, he called out, Mom, what was that? I said, my glass of coffee exploded. He said, it sounded like a piggy bank exploded. I looked all around, there was little pieces of round, perfectly rounded glass. Not the perfect ovals, but not jagged. Little, perfectly sized bits of glass. They were all over my kitchen, as was coffee. It had exploded in some way. I actually gathered them up, looked at them, thought about it, and thought, this looks exactly like the cover of the Pebbles that is on the Rosary guide. On the guide to how to do the Rosary. Eventually I thought, maybe this is God's way of saying it might be a good idea if you said a rosary, Missy, while you're going through a hard time. So afterwards I sat down and said a rosary. Then I said another, then I said another. Then I had my local priest come over, we said a rosary together. Then I wound up, it was after 9/11 and I was on the subway a great deal for various boring and complicated reasons. And I'm always there on the subway saying my rosary. And I'm telling you, wherever I went, peace broke out. It was a rocking time on the New York City subway in those days. It was very interesting. There were some interesting things going on. I'm telling you, I'd sit there, I'd say my rosary. Every good thing would happen around me.
I was fascinated because last time we did an interview, it was at your home, and I wanted to see the altar of sacrifice where you actually write all these great columns and books. And on your windowsill there, looking out onto a church, in the windowsill is this goblet, a little wine glass, filled with these little pieces of glass from the coffee mug.
From the exploding coffee glass.
Why do you leave that there?
Because I wanted to remember forever what happened. I felt it was a little small miracle. I felt it was, you know, God talks to us all in interesting ways. I felt I was being talked to. And I gathered all those little pieces of glass together. I washed them all off, and I had a beautiful wine glass, crystal wine glass. I put them in the wine glass. Then I thought, well, this belongs in the sun. So I put them on the windowsill, and now I can't remove them. Now it's like, never forget the power of the rosary.
You also mention in the book, there's a moment, and it's a letter that I was struck by. His letter to artists. And you mentioned my friend Jim Caviezel, who I might say, I gave the letter to artists too, but I'm not going to take credit. But
he didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I noticed. Tell me why you were moved by that, and I'll ask the next question when you answer this one.
All right. I love it that the Pope was an artist, that he was a playwright, you know, that we know he was a great writer. There are people who criticize the way he writes, and I understand it because he starts, he's kind of circular. He really circles back. He goes forward, then he comes back, forward, back. I understand the complaint, and yet there's something very powerful and almost tactile in his writing that has real power for me. He was an artist. He wrote a letter to artists in which he explained to them, or asserted to them is perhaps the way to put it, that the journey of attempting to make art is a spiritual journey in which we are looking for God. And we are, as humans, working with human material, imagination, etc., destined in a way to fail. Because it is limited. It is not God. It is only the beautiful attempt to find God. And so it takes great courage to be an artist, and it has great meaning for human beings to attempt to be artists. And artists should be respected. Period. End of story. It transfixed me. It transfixed Jim Caviezel, too, who as an actor is an artist, and who took, as you know, having given it to him, who took a great meeting.
Well, I didn't give him the performance. Somebody else gave him the performance. I just gave him the paper.
It had real meaning for him. And sometimes I think it's important for artists to remember that they are human beings here for a reason, not just creative little jumping beans, jumping all over the place.
In light
it
of
all
that,
has purpose and meaning.
In light of all that, in the post-9/11 world, why does Peggy Noonan do what Peggy Noonan does? write and chronicle our lives each day?
Oh, I'm not sure what the answer to that is beyond, I think this is where God put me. And
does it have new meaning now than it did perhaps before you came to all of this?
Do you know, I've been a writer and a writer and a columnist and an essayist for 20 years, almost 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt in that time that I am operating at a very interesting point in history. And that it is partly my job and partly your job to keep it going, if you will. Do you know what I mean? Just keep it going, keep trying to make it better. The way I do it is simply by writing. I can't make shoes. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to make shoes.
Neither can I.
I don't know how to paint. I can't dance.
Oh, I'll bet you can. How would you condense for me, to get back to the book, how would you condense for me the belief of John Paul II? You mentioned at one point here, despite the great volumes we have on this Pope, very little is written about what he actually believed.
Yeah.
You set that straight here, and I really loved that chapter.
Yeah.
Give me the Reader's Digest of his belief, if you could.
Jesus Christ is the center of the world, the center of life, and the center of all history. End of story. Everything else is an elaboration. Everything else is commentary. That's what, when you get down to this
the
Pope,
nitty-gritty, that's what it is. There was something here, you talk about the mistakes of this Pope, and I thought this was truly honest, and God knows we need a little honesty now. And you say at one point in the book, one mistake in my view is that he did not move forcefully enough against the embarrassment of how the Mass is celebrated in the West, the banalization of the liturgy, which is so pervasive that a priest told me recently that saying the flat, ungainly words of Catholic rites is like chewing cardboard.
Yeah.
Why do you think he was so slow to move against those things? And why did that become important to you, Peggy Noonan?
All right. Why is it important to me? Because I go to Mass. That's why. Because I want to have my spirit lifted, and because I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want the liturgy to be something that is just this ungainly thing that you wonder, did they change the language and the approach here in order to make worship easier for people, not understanding who people are and thinking they're a little dumb? Or was it wicked? Were they trying to make it worse for all of us so we wouldn't come back? The Mass has deteriorated in my time. What we say, what we do in the Mass, the concentration, the height of it has deteriorated in my time. So I think it's important for me and it's important for all of us. So that's one thing. Why did this Pope not move forcefully enough? I'll tell you. Someone once said, show me the headlines that were around when a young man is 20, and I'll tell you what he thinks about for the rest of his life. Isn't that interesting? The headlines around this young man, Karol Wojtyła's life when he was 20, were political, Nazism, sin, communism, sin, oppression, sin, lack of freedom. Those are the things he came forward and worked on. The deterioration of the West, the cultural deterioration, was not, do you know what I mean? He was
center in his life.
Not front and center in his imagination. We all take our imagination. It's almost as if we develop our imagination at a certain time in our adulthoods and go forward with it. So I don't think it was there for him in a big way. I assume it is very much there on Benedict's menu of things to contemplate and move on.
I want to talk about the final time you saw John Paul II. You were part of an American delegation. This was for the Beatification of Mother Teresa and the 25th anniversary of the papacy, correct?
Yes, it was so fabulous.
Of John Paul's papacy. Yeah. Was that the last time you saw him?
It was the last time I saw the Pope. It was really, what was it, six months before he died? He was marking his 25th anniversary in the papacy, and he chose, at the time that he was marking his 25th anniversary, to have the beatification of Mother Teresa, whom he had loved. You know, and who was his friend. And so I was part of the U.S. delegation. I was very lucky I was over there. Oh, it was fabulous. The Pope was very ill. When we saw him, in St. Peter's, and when we saw him at Masses, we knew we would never see him again, the members of this delegation. I think we all knew it was the last time we were setting eyes on him. He was very old. He was still beloved. You couldn't stop looking at him when you saw him, in part because he was so obviously suffering.
In pain.
In pain, but also in the suffering of someone whose brain is working, whose sensibility is there, whose sensitivity is there, but who cannot move, you know, and who cannot go forward and do what he wants to do. And yet, as I said before, that makes a statement. Life is good. All human life is good. It is worth living, and it must be appreciated and honored. So I felt that he came forward and did that every day. To be at the Beatification Mass of Mother Teresa, and to see her in the middle of a great scandal in our church, to see this small, homely, essentially peasant-like person be celebrated as a great one by all of the cardinals and bishops of the church arrayed before her. I thought God was telling them something. I thought he was saying, you know what, this is the future. This small, humble peasant person, this person who gives her all for others to do something beautiful for God.
What do you make of his death as you watched him leave us very slowly?
I'll never get over his death. I'll never get over what happened on the streets of Rome when this man died. The spontaneous uprising of young people, of Europeans. Everybody knows the faith is dead in Europe. Well, really? Someone didn't tell the millions of people who engulfed Rome to mark. There's a funny thing about people, you know, people weren't waking up the last few years of John Paul II's life saying, gee, aren't we lucky we're living in the reign of a very great man. They weren't waking up saying that. You know, people are funny. They look away, they don't mention, they don't talk, they're not interested. And then this man left us. And it was as if everybody knew he was great. We loved him, and they engulfed that city. I will never get over them yelling, the great, Magnus, Magnus, in the crowds. You were there. You saw it with your eyes. I watched. I couldn't get enough TV. I'm there with my clicker going from CNN to MSNBC to all. I'm watching George Weigel on NBC. But I was thrilled by the spontaneous uprising of feeling for and appreciation for this man. I believe that spontaneous uprising forced this church to choose as their next pope the man who had been raised up by John Paul to speak at his funeral. Big Ben, as I call him. He's my Big Ben. Oh my God, what an amazing time. I will never get over the Bible being open on John Paul's casket and the wind coming by and turning the pages of the Bible until it closed. I mean, I'll never get over it. At the end of the Mass. Oh, no. I'm telling you, I just got chills again. I'll never get over what I saw.
No, it was an amazing
It was
moment.
a miracle.
It was.
It was a miracle.
That continued. What do you want people to take from this book, Peggy?
Life is good. God is good. John Paul was good.
Let me know what you thought of tonight's show and which of our interviews you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of Conversations the World Over. You can always write me at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. The new show premieres each Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. And for those of you outside the United States, go to EWTN.com for your airtimes. Next week, my conversation with the former exorcist of the Archdiocese of New York, Father James LaBarre. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. The conversations continue. Don't miss them. Bye now.